Good morning. My name is Silky Feather, and I am so glad you are here with us. Thanks for stopping by and seeing what we're up to. And today, we're up to finishing our book, How to Unfuck Your Habitat. You're Better Than Your Mess, by Rachel Hoffman and read by Emily Woo Zeller.
You might be sitting in your dorm room, studio apartment, or bedroom in someone else's house, having listened this far, and thinking, this advice is fine, I guess, but I don't have a whole freaking house. Fair enough. Trying to maintain an entire existence's worth of stuff in a tiny little space brings its own set of annoying problems. When you're dealing with a smaller space like a dorm room or a single bedroom, every single bit of organization becomes critically important. When you have less space overall to deal with, a little bit of mess looks pretty huge. You have to be smarter and more creative about storage. You need to pare down your belongings and keep only what's useful and loved. Easy, right? Just kidding! It sucks! It can be pretty difficult to maintain a clean and organized environment in a space better suited for tiny garden gnomes than actual human beings. But it can be done. Only keep what you need. Is there anything good about a small living space? Of course there is. It takes a lot less effort to keep it clean. Everything takes just a fraction of the time. Maintenance is considerably less involved, even though it's more frequent. You don't have to dedicate huge amounts of time to keep small spaces clean. You don't have to start over again in a whole bunch of different rooms. You just need to think on a smaller scale and re-examine your habits and schedules in order to keep on top of a smaller space. To start with, when you're dealing with such limited space, you won't need half the shit you have. The best, most effective way to keep things clean and organized in a small space is to have less stuff. By paring down your possessions, you make your cleaning and maintenance much easier. But this isn't the time to get overwhelmed with some minimalist ideal. Remember that your goal isn't to have no possessions, but to really think critically about what you need and what you'll use. Unnecessary items will just add to the chaos, give you more to have to pick up and store on a regular basis, and reduce the usable space in your room. So try to bring into the space only things that are needed and useful. Be honest with yourself about this. When you start out with only necessary and useful items, you reduce the number of things you need to store, hide, maintain, or otherwise deal with. If you're already in this space and have more things than you reasonably have space for, your first step is going to involve figuring out what, of all those things, it's necessary for you to hang on to. Use your storage space wisely. In a small space, in addition to reducing the amount of stuff you have, it's absolutely critical to maximize your storage. Even more importantly, you should be matching your storage to your stuff. When your space is clean, every item should have a place, preferably one that's stashed away somewhere and not out on display. To accomplish this, you should ideally be using every space you can find, under things, behind things, and even above things. Use vertical space whenever possible, and never underestimate how much shit you can fit under a bed, especially if you can manage to elevate the bed a little bit. Tension rods, hooks, and flat storage are infinitely useful in small spaces. Small spaces require creativity, so look at every possible square inch for how it can be useful to you. If you have a closet, make sure you're using it to its full advantage. Most people just use a small part of the available space in their closets, the hanging bar, the floor, maybe a shelf above the hanging bar. But there's so much more space you can be utilizing. If you have a shelf above the hanging bar, don't just put some stuff on it and call it a day. Create another level or two of storage with modular shelves, baskets, dividers, or boxes. Same thing with the closet floor. At the very least, you can stack shoe boxes on the floor, and with just a little more effort, you can create more complex storage with shelving and storage boxes. Using the closet floor for shoe storage is really common, but shoes take up a lot of available floorage and waste just as much. If you have a lot of shoes to store, it's worth it to come up with a space-maximizing storage system that doesn't just occupy all of your floor space. There's even more closet storage space than most people don't think to use. The interior walls and the ceiling can hold a bunch of items with the help of hooks or bars. The inside of a closet door can be utilized when you employ hanging storage. Even the hanging bar can do double or triple duty with hanging storage for shoes, accessories, or even folded clothes, or bars that create a second level for hanging clothes. There are plenty of commercial closet organization solutions available, but you don't need to spend a ton of money on this stuff. Most can be improvised at home with stuff you already have, or found at discount stores for much less. Since it's all going to be behind a closet door, you don't need to worry so much about everything matching perfectly. Closets are great because you can fit so much shit in them, and then you can just close the door and hide everything. Speaking of which, try to hide as much as you can. Remember that open storage can look very messy, especially when you're dealing with a smaller space. Shelves and such are great for maximizing how much stuff you can fit into a smaller space, but when that storage is open and on display, it doesn't necessarily make things look neater and more streamlined. Enclosed storage will make everything look a little bit neater simply because it's out of the way. Matching storage is great but expensive, so try to focus on getting everything stashed so that it's hidden but still accessible when you need it. As always, set up your storage in a logical way. Things you use the most need to be the most accessible, while less frequently used items can be tucked away in places that are harder to get to. Storage spots that are difficult to reach should be reserved for the stuff you won't need to access often. Use your drawers and closets to the best advantage that you can, but don't just cram them full of stuff, because the first time you need to get something out, you're going to end up with stuff strewn everywhere. And once it's out of its hiding spot, the likelihood of it getting back in there is pretty slim. If you have limited, or no, closet space, things become a little bit trickier, but by no means impossible. Without closet space, your storage situation may have to rely on shelves, freestanding furniture, or other open storage means. In this situation, too, it's good to try to hide things. Just keep in mind that it might require additional storage pieces like boxes and baskets. Without closet space, it may be worth investing in a covered or enclosed clothing rack to provide much-needed hanging space. And hide it, at least a little. Of course, that involves spending money that you may not have, so if that's not an option, it can totally be worked around. Just re-examine your drawer and cabinet space in freestanding pieces like dressers, as well as maximizing space under, above, and behind other things. Find some hidden storage. Walk around your room and identify one spot that's currently being wasted that could be used for storage. This can be under or behind existing furniture, inside a closet, or on top of something else. Once you've identified a space, go ahead and move some stuff there and see how it works. Everything in its place. As far as habits go, there's nothing more important than don't put it down, put it away. This is so crucial in small spaces. When you return every item to its predetermined home, you drastically cut down on visible clutter and keep everything looking streamlined and clean. Of course, this assumes that everything has a predetermined home, so if you don't have that planned out and squared away, make it your first priority. When you know where everything is going back to, you save yourself a lot of mental and physical energy by not having to work out a plan every single time you put something away. A place for everything and everything in its place. Maybe one of Aunt Edna's annoying old adages that makes you roll your eyes, but when you're dealing with limited space and a desire to keep it clean, it's actually pretty relevant. You're also going to need to do maintenance way more frequently. One or two things out of place can create a huge amount of visual chaos in a small space, so your maintenance habits are going to be vital. Resetting things back to clean daily will be incredibly helpful, as will keeping to a maintenance routine more frequently than perhaps you'd like. Yes, having to pick up or clean once or twice a day, every day, may suck a little bit, but letting things go for a few days becomes much less of an option in a small space. Getting used to doing a small amount of cleaning more frequently will greatly cut down on how often you'll need to do a huge total room clean. Not to mention that the amount of time and effort involved is really quite minimal. We're talking just a few minutes every day, something that can be accomplished during a commercial break, or while dancing to one guilty pleasure pop song. Also keep in mind that in a small space, garbage, laundry, and dishes need to be dealt with ASAP. There's not only the clutter aspect to deal with, but those things also have the potential to get stinky and gross, fast. By keeping on top of them, you can keep the funk away and discourage little critter friends from moving in and making themselves at home. Once ants, cockroaches, fruit flies, or mice move in, getting rid of them is time-consuming and soul-crushing. Better to just prevent the problem entirely. It can be a tough habit to build, but dealing with your dishes and trash immediately and your dirty laundry regularly and frequently is probably the biggest thing you can do to keep things from getting out of control messy. And when it comes to laundry, don't forget about the floor robe. Oh God, the floor robe! This is absolutely one of the biggest way that small spaces go to shit very quickly. In a small space, every piece of clothing flung to the floor increases the chaos by a huge percentage. One of the best ways to keep your room looking clean, even if it really isn't all that clean, is to keep the floor clear. Put dirty clothes in the hamper, and put clean clothes away. Don't even begin to consider your floor as freestanding storage for your clothing. It's not. It's a place for you to walk and to put your furniture on. It's not a dresser. It's not a garbage can. And if you aren't careful, it can breed mess like you wouldn't believe. One pair of socks leads to a whole outfit, leads to every article of clothing you own strewn about the place. Put your clothes away. Defeat the floor robe. Mini challenge. Take 10 minutes and reset as much as you can back to clean. Put items away, throw trash out, and hang up or put away your clothes until the timer goes off. Dorm room drama. If you're in a dorm room and sharing with another person, all of these problems have the potential to end up twice as bad. Keep in mind that you will be tripping over each other's shit all the time, so it's in your best interest to come up with a plan to deal with it before you inevitably start hating each other. Small spaces plus people who barely know each other equals a recipe for disaster. The best way to avoid, or at least mitigate, most roommate problems is to anticipate them and make a plan for what happens when something arises. One of the most common things that causes strife between roommates is differing standards and effort regarding cleanliness. Ignoring this, or pretending you're somehow going to be the one exception to roommate drama, is a surefire way to set yourself up for conflict and aggravation. The close quarters of a dorm room can compound all roommate issues, mainly because you're already tripping over each other on a near constant basis. When there's conflict between two people living in a tiny room, everything seems so much worse because there's nowhere you can retreat to, no door you can close between you and the problem. It's even more important when you live in a dorm then, to start out with a solid plan, so that two or more people plus no real personal space doesn't have to equal resentment and anger. It may seem juvenile and unnecessary, but a chore list can be just the tool you need to keep your dorm room situation from devolving into a screaming hellscape of animosity and filth. It's non-judgmental, unemotional, and straightforward. Once you've figured out who's going to do what and when, there's no need for arguments or passive-aggressive behavior, at least when it comes to the state of your room. Nevertheless, problems will arise, and a written agreement can help you deal with them. Don't be naive and think that you'll be able to cruise through a roommate situation without anyone getting resentful or angry. It always happens. Best to walk into the situation with open eyes and fully prepared to handle the inevitable. Before dividing up the chores, sit down and have a conversation. Figure out if there are any tasks one of you doesn't mind doing at all, and which ones you loathe with every fiber of your being. Then determine the general magnitude of each task. An equitable division of chores isn't necessarily going to result from having the same number of tasks. It's the time investment that matters. Big chores and small chores, depending on how much time and effort they require, should be divided up so that neither of you feels like you're shouldering the majority of the work. Small spaces, big problems. If you're in this super fun situation of living in a small space within someone else's larger space, like a room at your parents' home or a rented room within a shared home, you have the added complication of having some items in common spaces that are not entirely under your control. all of the same principles still apply. Maximize your storage. Pick up a little every day. Plus all of the stuff you need to do in common spaces. Once again, dishes and trash are really important. Make sure you're keeping on top of those, not just in your own space but in common spaces as well. Doing your part to reset and deal with your effect on common spaces is a necessary part of these kinds of living situations. That said, you may find that the common spaces are messier than you'd like, or that your possessions aren't being respected. Like all shared living problems, this one isn't ever going to get better until you talk about it. Have a conversation with the preset goals of defining everyone's roles and responsibilities in creating a clean and harmonious living situation. Keep in mind that if you don't like people messing with your stuff, that goes both ways. If, during your discussion, a workable plan for handling the common spaces arises, great! But it might not. If the person or people whom the space ultimately belongs to don't want to change their messy ways, the best you can do is advocate for yourself and your place in the home. Deal with your own stuff and your own mess, and decide if the living situation is something you can deal with. You may also want to focus your housekeeping efforts primarily on whatever small space you can call your own. Keeping your own room, space, cleaned up to your own standards may be the most control you have over the situation. So if that's the only place you can focus your attention, do that. Make your small part of the larger space a comfortable and happy space for yourself, and try to let go of being stressed out by what other people do with their stuff. Of course, you have the right to a comfortable place to live. So if the expectations and standards are drastically different between you and whoever you share space with, it might not be a livable situation for you. Parental units. Unlike in most other shared space arrangements like being roommates or living with a significant other, there's a considerable power imbalance when adult children live with their parents. "My house, my rules" is easily the most common refrain when children, regardless of age, live in their parents' home. But that can be a damaging mindset fraught with problems that extend beyond sharing a home and into the familial relationship. While, yes, it's a logical viewpoint, it also ignores the fact that we all have the right to enjoy where we live with a modicum of autonomy. There are any number of reasons adult children may live with their parents: cultural norms, financial limitations, etc. When children have moved away and then move back, it can be difficult to reframe the parent-child relationship in a way that respects both the parent's authority over the home and the child's autonomy as an adult. As in every other shared living situation, the best way to come to an arrangement that works for everyone involved is to talk about it. Have a frank and honest conversation about expectations and responsibilities. With frequent and productive communication, this living arrangement doesn't have to be full of emotional minefields. One of the more difficult things to deal with when living with an adult in your parents' home can be accepting that you only have control over a very small part of where you live. The house as a whole is not yours, so it may be tough to exert any kind of power over the living conditions in general. What you can do, though, is make your room into a haven that you truly enjoy. With good storage, a strong organizational system, and by staying on top of keeping it clean and tidy, you can turn your one room into a mini home that you enjoy spending time in, without having to stress out about all of the other rooms that are still firmly under your parents' jurisdiction. Living in small spaces doesn't have to mean a cluttered, chaotic environment. With a small amount of effort and a solid plan for getting and staying organized, a small space can be just as comfortable, clean, and inviting as a whole house. And while having to pick up and clean more often can be kind of annoying, it also completely eradicates the need for stressed-out marathon cleaning. So whether you're in a dorm room, a tiny studio apartment, or just one room in someone else's house, you can still very easily make that space your own and keep it from devolving into a disaster zone. You just have to get started.
And that was Chapter 9 of Unfuck Your Habitat. Thanks again for stopping by. This is Silky Feather, and I am so glad that you stopped by our nest and hung out with me for the few minutes that you did. We only have a few more chapters, and then we will finish this book. Be kind to one another. Life is too short. Hit the like and subscribe today.